Hello and welcome back to the Honest Business Podcast. I hope you are very well. I'm very much looking forward to today's episode because I have lots of conversations around this and I know it is something that people and business owners need to get really clear in their heads, and I think there's an interesting discussion to have today, and hopefully this is going to educate and kind of give you things to think about as you grow and scale your business and generally kind of assess it. And as you kind of incorporate your planning and look towards the future, this may help. So this is kind of a key piece of strategy work before you get to the strategy work. And what I mean by that is this is just some concepts and ideas to grapple with before you sort of create your growth strategy and write your growth strategy. And, whether that's something that you're going to come to me for and that you're going to have me help you with, or whether that's something you do on your own, this is just a really key concept to kind of understand and delve into. And to kind of preference this whole episode, the reason I'm doing it is because this concept sounds very easy, but I believe that it's intertwined and it's, so dependent on the business and the business owner. And it is needed. It's a needed conversation. And often people can get to 7 figures, even 8 figures without fully understanding this and fully working out what does that mean for them. And if you're someone who's listening who makes 5 figures or 6 figures a year and doesn't have a desire to go more, that's fine, because this is really going to benefit you and really going to help you understand. Like, it's actually crucial at that point, because actually, if you're someone who wants to make £8,000 a year or wants to make £50,000 a year or wants to make 150 or 200, and you've got to really be careful because of the things I'm going to go into here, this episode is really, really important. So let's just dive in. Today we're going to talk about, should you focus on revenue or profit? And that might mean, should you increase your revenue? Should you focus on increasing your profit margin? Should you, which of those two should you focus on? And for most people, they're going to think, well, surely if you increase one, the other one increases. And to some degree, that's true, but it's also much more complex than that, and it's much more nuanced, and that's why we're having this conversation. Yes, if you want a simplistic answer, yes, try and increase both. Increase both, go for both, why not? Love it, do it, and obviously if you increase your revenue by a dramatic percent, then naturally your profit should, in theory, as we're going to talk about, increase, but that's not always the case. The one thing I want to preface this by saying is, you need revenue in a business to make profit work for you. I'm going to repeat that again. You need revenue in a business to make profit work for you. And I say that because sometimes people are obsessed with profit margins. They're obsessed with how much money they take out of a business. They're obsessed with what do they get out of it. And whilst that's important and that's really, key, obviously, that only works when there's money in the business. And it's very easy to make a somewhat small amount of money in the sense of 30,000, 40,000, 50,000. And please do not think I am downplaying that or saying that that's not a lot of money, because it is a lot of money. And for some people, that is the money that they need. So this is not me sat here saying you need to go and build a massive business. However, depending on what your goals are for the business, depending on what the vision is, that will massively dictate how much money that is inside of your business and what that means for you. So what does £50,000 mean? And is that a lot of money, or is it not so much a lot of money? And therefore that then dictates where you need to go from here. So you need revenue in your business to make the profit work. Stop focusing on what I basically see is there's a lot of small business owners, especially online business owners, but also actually not just online, small business owners who are obsessed with profit. But the biggest issue is they're not making enough revenue. That's the issue. A lot of people are not making enough revenue and complaining that their business isn't profitable enough, when actually they've got to get over a certain step in order for it then to become profitable. But instead, people sit in this valley of unprofitability or low profitability and then blame the business model and start ripping the business model apart. Often that's not the solution. The solution lies in this idea of you need to get the revenue up. But let's just rewind a section, because I don't want to get already quite far into this. So you really need to look at your business model, and you need to look at your financial forecasting, and you need to understand, what do you want to achieve? And this all comes back to, what do you want, right? And this comes back to understanding how much you need to live what you want, or to have what you want, or to make the impact you want to have. But you need to look at your business model, and you need to understand your money, and you need to understand what does that financial forecast mean for X, Y, and Z situation? Now, if you're already sat here thinking, this just sounds so over my head and sounds horrendous, this is something that I can help you with. It's something that an accountant can help you with. It's something that a financial advisor can help you with in different realms. I'm not an accountant or a financial advisor, but the way I do this is more from a strategic perspective and understanding your numbers. And sometimes I can understand your numbers and then relay them to you, and that's sometimes a bit more easier than other avenues. But you need to understand what that means for you. And the reason that's important is because ultimately, if someone comes to me and they're making £60,000 a year, I have got no context around that. And my advice and what I would tell people to do would be wildly different if you gave me 3 different businesses. Each person's advice would be different based on what they want. Someone who is making 60 grand a year, but only ever wants to make a maximum of 80 grand a year, their advice is going to be very different from someone whose business has made £60,000 in year 2 and wants to eventually get to 2 million a year by year 6. That's a very different set of advisory tools that I would sort of deploy in a very different strategic perspective. And so you understanding what it is you want, really, really important and really key. Like, I really want you to understand it and sit in it and think like, yeah, this is what I want. But going back to a more factual perspective, you need to understand that revenue is key because the revenue brings the money into the business, and that means the business can do things. You can invest in things, you can pay for things, you can grow your team, all of the things that you probably want to do. A lot of that will be resting on revenue, because even if it's like you've got to grow your audience, arguably some people would say that that's down to your revenue because actually you've then got money to be able to put into growing your audience. So even if it's not a direct expense, the revenue piece is huge. The other side of that is profit is really important. Obviously, we're building businesses and we're not just building it for the sake of it. Like, you want to take some money out, you want to live, you don't just do this for the sake of it. Most of us are doing this because actually we need to live and we need to sustain ourselves. And so therefore profit is obviously key and profit is important, and we do need to incorporate that. However, what I tend to say to people is it is much easier for me to come into a business that is making 100 grand a year, 200 grand a year, 300 grand a year, 1 million a year, 10 million a year, and improve profitability and make a tweak a business model and kind of find ways of the business becoming more profitable so that you can take more money out and you can benefit more, than it is trying to do so from a small pot of money where the profitability is very low. Now, that's not me saying that high revenue equals high profit, because that's not the case. Yeah, business model would dictate your profit margin to some degree and your industry. So I work with businesses who have a high revenue, but they also have a low profit margin. And when I say low profit margin, this is all subjective, because depending on your industry is going to depend on what is classed as low and high. If you have an online business, some online businesses are operating at like an 80%, 90%, 70% profit margin, which is amazing. I work with some businesses who their profit margin is 10% or 20% on a good day. And that level of profit margin means that the advice that they get and the strategy and the strategic input they have from someone like me, and luckily it is me, needs to be so refined and so solid, which is what many people can't do what I do with those businesses and get the level of results that I do, because it is so dependent on them understanding key concepts, and for them to be, they're walking a very fine line, essentially what I'm saying. If you are operating at a 70 or 80% or 90% profit margin, there's a lot of scope in there to change things. There's a lot of scope to make a wrong decision. Often I'm working with business owners that don't have that. And it is a very different ball game to be in. Now, either way you are, ideally, obviously, if you can get a 50% profit margin, great. Or if you're at, so somewhere along that line, fabulous. We do want a high profit margin. A high profit margin is a great place to be, and it is, fabulous for business. But if you are someone who sat there thinking, well, my business model doesn't have an 80% profit margin, you're not failing. And don't see it as the definition of success is to have a high profit margin, because that's just not true. And for some businesses and for some industries, it's physically impossible. Full stop. Isn't going to happen from a traditional model. There are things that I can do that help a business profitability to massively increase. And so I can create over a long period of time. I can take a business from 10%, 20% profit margin, to providing they're happy to expand and do things and look at things differently, you know, to 30% or 40%. I mean, 40% is pushing it, but you know, I can make a massive, huge difference in that business's, you know, ecosystem, but it's not going to happen overnight. Now that's a whole different episode of how it will increase profitability and what I do and, you know, what my strategy is to that. But what I'm trying to express here is that this is nuanced and this is important that you fully understand and integrate in your head about this, because it goes beyond just sort of thinking about, well, I'm going to look at profit this month or I'm going to look at revenue. This is a yearly thing. It's a 5-year thing. It's a 10-year thing. It's a wider sort of thing to deal with. So hopefully you're getting that right. Revenue is key. Profit is important. I just don't buy into this narrative that you see online that's like, well, you know, revenue means nothing and profit's everything, because actually that just is not true. Personally, I agree that having a high revenue means nothing in the sense if you can make 500 grand a year, but if your expenses are 450,000 a year, then you're netting out with 50. And actually, the person who is having a much better time and makes 50 grand a year and keeps 50 grand a year is better off, and arguably is a much better, more successful business owner. You could argue, but that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm not talking about using revenue as a metric of success. What I'm talking about is, what does it mean for you as a business owner, and what does it mean towards the health and security of a business? So typically, I want to just bring this conversation around to, what do you do at what point and when? Now, ultimately, I can't give you an exact answer on a podcast. I need to know your business, and then I can tell you specifically to your business at what point to go for this and what point to go for that. However, as a general rule, if you are starting out, you need to focus on revenue. Don't even panic about the profitability. However, I do preface that by saying, please do not price yourself so that you have zero profit. That's not, like, I'm not suggesting that. But what I am saying is, make sure your offers are priced well. Make sure your business is set up. Don't be scared of investing, because the reality of it is you're going to potentially funnel a lot of money into your business at the first, you know, few years. Don't panic about the profitability, because you need to sort the revenue out. And for the first sort of 5 years of a business, the revenue is kind of the thing that you've got to chase after. Obviously, you need to be in profit, ideally. And many of you listen to this are self-funded, are bootstrapped, and so therefore it does need to be profit. If you've got funding, there's arguments there that it doesn't. However, I still believe that you do need to be profitable, regardless of whose money you're funneling into your business. But for those of you who are bootstrapped and who are self-funded, like I am, you need to have profit there, but it needs to be profit there so that you can reinvest it should you wish to. It's not a let's make loads of profit so I can take loads of profit out. If you want to do that, that is completely fine. I am not saying you have to build a business and for 5 years you can't have any money out, but that's not what I'm saying at all. Do whatever you want. Do what works for you. Some of you need the business to make money in order to live, because that is what, you know, the whole reason you're doing this. So please take all of this, what I'm saying, with a pinch of salt. You've got to understand that I'm saying this. And there's various different people listening with businesses across the world of different situations. So take what you need from this conversation and then sort of leave what doesn't fit for you. However, generally speaking, first sort of startup years, you need to go for revenue. Deal with the profit later on. And I, you know, sometimes I'm working with businesses who are 10 years in, 5 years in, 15 years in. That's when they start to really look at profitability, legacy. What does it mean for them? How do they kind of benefit from the business more than they ever have done? Right now, if you're at the beginning stages, you need to look at your revenue. However, obviously make sure things are priced correctly and that you are profitable. Don't just go for revenue and actually find out that your profit margin's minus 10%, because that ain't going to work. Then, when someone says to me, well, at what point do you focus on profit? As I've said, I can't give you a definitive answer on a podcast. However, typically it wants to be at the point in which you're stabilized to a degree where you have consistent revenue coming in. Ideally, you've got recurring revenue coming in. And then there is a point in time where you say, right, let's look at profitability and let's look at what does this mean? Because what you will find is your profitability is going to change as your business grows and as it scales. So as the size of your business increases, you can still be doing the same sort of things in your business. I'm using air quotes here. Same kind of model, business model, offerings, but your profitability will naturally shift. Often it becomes more profitable as the business increases. However, take that with a pinch of salt, because some businesses I work with, that isn't the case. But for most people listening to this, if you can up your revenue, your profit will naturally increase there or thereabouts. Some people will find that massively increases. So for what happens with a lot of businesses is it's least profitable at the like 0 to 80 grand a year mark. And then what can happen is between the kind of 400,000 to 700,000 point is where it's kind of not most profitable, because you can always make it more profitable as you scale, but sort of it's the most profitable, if we just, let's just say that. And then you can get to kind of the 100 grand a year, well, sort of the 80 to 150, 170 grand is where it's kind of a bit risky, because it's kind of like, oh, is it worth it? Is it not? And it sometimes can be challenging from a tax perspective. And, you know, there's multiple different things in between that. And as I've said, that's very much, you know, person dependent. It's hard for me to make these comments. However, I'm doing it because I actually think it's interesting. And if nothing else, you know, I hope you understand that the duality here exists and the nuance exists. But you don't just be panicked about profit if you're in the first like 3 years, 5 years. Like, it's not, I wouldn't panic over it. And that's where I see a big mistake. And that's where I see a big mistake with business coaches and business advisors who are helping people with their businesses, who, like, I'm sat here thinking, hang on a minute, why are you advising them X, Y, and Z thing? Because that doesn't make sense from a longer term. It does in terms of an instant hit. And this is why we have an issue with people who support people with businesses, because many people who support people with businesses are looking at, how do I get an instant hit? How do I get an instant win for the client? How do I immediately make them feel better about their business? And that just is not the correct thing to do, in my opinion, which obviously is controversial, I'm aware. But for me, I'm bothered about what people's businesses look like in like 2 years' time, 10 years' time, 20 years' time. And often, you know, doing a kind of sharp decision to make profitability high for a certain season doesn't make sense. For some people, it will do, because they have to and they have no other choice and it needs to happen. However, I'm just saying, don't get obsessed with the profit thing. I hope this is interesting. I know this episode's, it is high level and it is this like grappling of to and fro and conversation, but I hope that it's useful and it's giving you food for thought. Is that the correct terminology? I think so. So the next thing to think about is, I want you to think about, at what point do you want to take money out of your business? Because that is the point where normally the profitability conversation comes up. So for some people, it's like they start a business and they know that actually they're not going to rely on the business for income in terms to live off until 2 years or 3 years down the line. For some people, it's like from day one, that has to support them and that's their sole income. For some people, it's, you know, they have a vision that maybe they're never going to take any money out of their business for a long, long time. That's going to be person dependent. And, you know, there's a lot of privilege that comes with that. And there's a lot of sort of ifs and buts with that. So I'm not going to dive into that. But ultimately, you need to understand, at what point do you want to take money out of your business? I believe that there's a real missold culture and mentality that goes on in business and business podcasts and business support, where people assume that from day one they're supposed to be able to take money out of their business. I mean, that to me is ludicrous. And I say that, and I understand that that's triggering for people, but like, you can't expect something to just give you stuff from day one. Reinvestment of business profits is such a massive, huge catalyst for growth. And again, I understand that if you are coming at this from, this puts money on the table and this puts food on the table and this, you know, pays for my mortgage and pays for this, then fine. Like, I'm not saying you should never rely on your business, because that wouldn't make sense. You're spending your time doing it. But I'm just saying, if you're at those beginning stages, don't quit your job straight away. Don't like panic into things. If some of you will have to quit your job because you can't do it otherwise and you just won't do it. But for the majority of people, keep it going. Keep other sources of income coming in, because your business, quite frankly, will deserve the money to some degree more than you will. And that sounds awful. And people really hate me when I say that. But what I mean by that is, like, you can burn through cash at such a rapid rate in this day and age with the cost of living crisis. I mean, you know, what does £1,000 get you? What does £10,000 get you? Do you burn that over 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months? Like, that's a kind of an argument that you can have with yourself. But what I mean is that if you invest £10,000 into a business, the ROI and the long-term sort of payback of that is arguably very high, providing you make a good investment of it. And so whilst I'm not saying that you should just pour money aimlessly into your business, because that's not the solution. I am sort of saying be cautious about what your expectations are around revenue and profit and around what do you take out. I think another thing that people don't understand is if you have a lifestyle business, and I'm all for lifestyle business, I have lifestyle businesses, like I do not shit on them because I think they're bloody great and I think it's the future and I think that's what most people are going to do going forward. You have to understand that if you make £80,000 a year in your business, it doesn't mean you're going to take home £80,000 a year. It's not nowhere near. And people understand, and the figures behind that is really important, and understanding, okay, well, if I make 200 grand a year, am I left with 40 grand, 50 grand, 60 grand? Am I left with 100 grand? Like, people get surprised at how much, especially tax wise, you're going to get taxed. And I don't think people think about what that means. Student loans, all of these bits and pieces that you have that you kind of don't think about. Really important for you to understand kind of how much money you need for your business. The kind of next point to this that I wanted to dive into was you understanding why you are doing what you are doing. So this whole conversation is really about you getting clear on what do you want, what are you working towards, what is the strategy that you are following, and where is that leading you to? Like, is this leading you to where you want to go, or is it taking you away? Is it actually after this conversation you're thinking, God, like, I don't even know what the hell I'm doing, or actually we've been going after this, but I need to like 3x what we're doing. What I would say is, for most people, if you run a business with you and a freelance team, or you and a couple of people, actually that's not true. Sorry, I'm already contradicting myself here. That is true to some extent, but I'm also going to add in people who have a small business. Maybe it's a family business. Maybe you have a team of 10 to 20 to 30 people. What many people don't understand and realize is how much money, as in how much revenue, they actually need to get out what they want. Don't underestimate that. Don't underestimate how big the revenue needs to be in order to get out what you want, because 9 times out of 10, it's way higher than anyone really thinks about. So what I mean by that is, if you think you want a 6-figure business because it sounds all fancy and it's like, oh, I've got a 6-figure business, and you make 100 grand a year, fully understand how much money you can actually take out of your business. Because most people actually, what they're saying they want is 6 figures, but is it that you want 6 figures in your pocket, in your bank account to live off? Because if so, most people are going to more likely be at the 300,000 plus mark. Again, that's just me speculating. It's not like a decisive thing. I know it's kind of tricky to give you a solid answer, but be understanding of that, because people come and work with me and they're like, right, I'm making 100 grand and I want to get 200, and then I go backwards and I work out what it is they want, and actually I realize that they actually want a 400 grand a year business, but we haven't got there yet, and that's okay. So that's just a really key thing of understanding what strategy are you doing, what are you currently doing, where are you going, what is the goal, is the strategy leading you to where you want to go, or is the strategy leading you somewhere completely off the road, down the tunnel that isn't actually where you want to go? And if you're sat listening to this thinking, this is me and I need to get this sorted and I want to understand this better and I want to have a full plan that feels really solid to me with a longer term perspective, I can help you with this. We can do this through an intensive. I can do it through a CEO strategy day. You can come and work with me one-on-one for 6 months. Depends on where your business is at and what you want specifically. One of those offerings will really support you to move forward with this. And I urge you to take this really seriously and think about, yes, this is the kind of stuff I need to sort out. And this is not the necessarily fun or exciting stuff in business that you might want to invest in, but it's the stuff that is really going to change the trajectory of what you are doing and allow you to take out money that you want to take out and allow you to have the business that you've always desired and always dreamt of, and actually maybe are already creating, but you haven't realized you haven't got there yet. Or actually, some of you listening to this might think, I'm making more revenue than I ever have done, but my profit's feeling really low. How can I change that? How can I move forward from that? And that is stuff that I can 100% help you with. Some of it will be quick fixes. Some of it won't be. Some of it can be quite immediate, and other things may be a longer term solution. But there is lots of things that we can do together to help you to move forward. Now, I was going to round off the episode there, but then I decided that actually I want to talk you through some kind of reasons and examples of when you should focus on revenue over profit, or when profit over revenue is maybe more of a better solution for you. Now, as I've said, this is all nuanced. I'm going to talk through some points. These are not interlinked together necessarily. So it's just I'm saying a point and then let's move on and there's another point. And and naturally they all come together. But I'm not saying that these make up one picture. It's not that there's a picture of this is what you need for revenue over profit and this is all that you need for profit over revenue. Each point is sort of intertwined with ifs and buts for themselves. If not, we'll be here all day. So I'm not going to go through every single one and sort of nuance that. I'm just going to put that there now as a kind of disclaimer and run through these. And I'm going to talk about when you should focus on revenue over profit. And there's sort of 4 key areas that I'm going to touch on there. And then we've also got when you should look at profit over revenue. And I've got quite a few more in that camp because that's the point that people get a bit funny about and they don't know whether they should or shouldn't. So let's just talk about when you should focus on revenue over profit. So this is what I'm talking about. I'm talking about let's focus on upping your revenue and dealing with the profit later, or not worrying so much about the profit margin, okay? So, initial startup stages. We've talked on this a bit. When you're in the startup stage, and for some of you that's 1 year, some of you that's 3 years, some of you that's 5 years. I would argue for most people it's the first 3 to 5 years because people are still figuring out what they're doing, what makes sense, what doesn't. Like, it takes a long time, right? You're not a bad business owner. You're not all over the shop. It's just, it takes time for things to bed in. Initial startup stages, you're going to need to invest money. So you're going to need money from somewhere. So whether that's your self-funding, whether you are funding yourself, whether you're getting grants, whether you're looking at non-equity funding, whatever you're doing, money typically needs to be in the business. For a lot of us, that is, you are keeping the revenue that you're making and reinvesting it and reinvesting profit. And there's not enough spoken about the benefits of reinvesting profit. And that's not what I'm going to go into today, but there are huge, huge benefits of reinvesting your profit. So think about that and think about, okay, if you're in startup stages, typically you want to focus on revenue over profit. Next thing, brand awareness. It can be worth it to focus on revenue over profit from a brand awareness perspective. What do I mean by that? I mean 10 different things, but let's just focus on one that'll make sense to most people. It is this idea that actually the more you can get your brand out there, arguably the more refined it becomes, the more household name it becomes, the more commonly known it becomes. That is better for your business, and longer term will be better for your profitability. But for the initial sign, it will be a revenue driving activity. It's a let's get this product in the most hands of people as possible. Let's focus on, can we make £200,000 in 6 months from selling this hair clip and it's really attached to a strong brand? Or can we create, can I go down the route of getting volume of clients versus depth of clients? Some people will go down that route. The other thing you need to look at is gaining competitive advantage. So for some people, if you want to gain competitive advantage in an industry or a sector, looking at your revenue and focusing on revenue growth versus profitability will make sense for you. Now, again, this you need to be very careful with. Very, very careful. And I say this point mainly for some niche businesses, from people in a niche industry, this really works for. But you've got to be careful here because it can go very wrong very fast. So gaining competitive advantage really can be made and done well through prioritizing revenue over profit. Next one, gaining more market share, which is kind of what we were talking about with the brand awareness stuff. You can really increase volume a lot of the time when you're focusing on revenue over profit. And, for some people, that's going to mean they're going to lower their price. Now, this is not something I talk about a lot. It's not something I recommend. But again, for some businesses, if you're in a niche market, it will make sense for you to gain more market share through increasing your revenue, but potentially lowering your profit. Because it will help you going forward, especially if you're in the year 4 or 5 stage and you're at a kind of turning point where you're like, right, okay, where are we going to go here? We've either got the big key players in the market and we need to shift. What are we going to do? And for some people, that's a make or break moment. And they say, right, let's go for revenue, let's drop the profit, and let's see what happens. Now, again, I'm not going to suggest you do this, and please don't take action purely based on a podcast episode, because that is not necessarily the best thing to do. However, some people, it will make sense for you to gain market share and do whatever you have to do that, and therefore you will focus on your revenue driving activity and you won't focus on how profitable is the business. Those are four of the key kind of more complex and more advanced technicalities around this. There's actually many more, but those were the four that I felt like were the most valuable for today's episode. We're now going to talk about profitability and looking at when should you focus on your profit margin, focus on what is your end profit figure, what's your, what is your profit figure for the end of the year over driving for more revenue. So this either means increasing your profit just across the board, or for some of you it will mean not increasing your revenue at all, but increasing your profit. So for some of you it might mean that you're going to make £80,000 a year, and last year you then took out 30 grand, but this year you want to take out 50 grand. And why do you do that, and how do you do that? For others, it's going to be that you're at 2 million a year, and actually the founders, the directors, shareholders are deciding they want money out. And so you want to go from having 100 grand a year profit to £250,000 profit so that you can take some money out. I'm going to quickly touch on some of the key points here that will kind of come into play as we discuss this. So, number one, tax purposes. This is the biggest reason people focus on profit a lot of the time. In terms of what I've just discussed about the £80,000 a year thing, or 50 grand a year or whatever, if you're at the kind of 6-figure mark or below, often from a tax perspective, that is when the profit thing really comes into play. And that's what I discussed earlier about people getting really obsessed with profit. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm just saying you have to get really clear of what you want in the long term kind of journey of your business, because from a tax perspective, it can be highly useful to focus on profit over revenue. 100%. Sorry if you could hear me just blowing my nose. Well, not blowing my nose, but dealing with my nose. It's running. I apologise. And I'm sorry if you're watching on video as well, because that's quite unpleasant. So yeah, from a tax perspective, sometimes it's going to make a lot of sense for you to look at how do you up your profit over your revenue. Some people will argue actually that doesn't make sense and that actually you should do the opposite. But what I'm talking about here is if for some of you you're not going over the VAT threshold, or you're purposely trying to avoid X, Y, and Z thing, then it will make sense to cap your revenue and instead focus on increasing your profitability. The next point is if you have a lifestyle business and your business is purposes to somewhat fund, and that's not bad. You shouldn't feel guilty for that, right? You can have a why for others and you can have a why for yourself. And if your why for yourself includes looking after yourself, which why shouldn't it? You needed to fund what you needed to fund, and therefore sometimes the profit is going to always come over the revenue, and that's okay. Be strategic with it. Understand why you're doing X, Y, and Z thing. The other point is around if you're in a mature market. So this is going to be quite specific to people, but if you're in a mature market, revenue growth might be quite limited. And so you kind of need to consolidate for a period of time and look at your profitability and work out, okay, how can I get the most profit out of this specific market share I do have, and kind of where the revenue is that you're sat in currently. Then you need to look at, and the solution to that, although we're not looking at solutions today for everything, just if anyone's in this point, you need to sort out your operations. You need to really look at how do we optimize everything, how do we standardize everything, yada, yada, yada. And then you need to migrate often. And you're going to have to look at other product lines, other offerings, other places to kind of gain business. Because if you're in a mature market, it's a challenge, arguably. There's also a lot of opportunity in a mature market, but sometimes that can be quite jaded and misguided and sort of, it's almost like you're on a part of a disruption campaign in terms of as well as whatever your business operations is. So if you're in a mature market, sometimes looking at profit over revenue growth will pay you back and make more sense. In terms of long-term viability for a business, sometimes that will make sense to focus on profit over revenue. What I mean by that is your business model may shift as it grows into a kind of legacy era, or if you feel quite happy with the growth and what you've achieved and you actually want a couple of years to just stabilize. The stabilization period, arguably for a lot of people, is a profit activity and is a profit extension activity. And so that can really help when you sort of prioritize that. It makes the decisions of how does your business model change and evolve easier because you're more focused on, well, actually, I want the profit to increase rather than the revenue. Another reason that you might want to look at focusing on profit versus revenue growth is if you're getting prepared for something that might happen. Now, this is a bit difficult because some of you will be like, well, why would we ever do that? Or how do you ever know that? Or is there ever a point in business where that comes up? But what I mean by that is you might know that actually you've been running the business for 10 years, year to year, profit to profit, kind of dividend to dividend. And actually the business isn't really, if you think about it solidly, in a solid place where it's structurally, financially really set and really solid. What I mean by that is maybe you take loads of money out, you take the money out that you've made each year, and then you start from not zero, but kind of zero every year. And actually maybe you're sitting thinking, I need to do something about that, and it's time to change it, and it's time to evolve that. You might want to build up cash reserves. Or you might want to do an M&A. M&A? I can't even say that. A merger and acquisition. Like maybe you want to acquire a business, or maybe you want to merge with a business. Then that acquiring a competitor is going to require you to have a hell of a backbone of your business. So many businesses do a merger and it's kind of a bit half-arsed. It doesn't really go in the way that they intended it to, or it doesn't really move quite as smoothly as it could have done. And a part of that is because it's been skimped on and it's been kind of like lastminute.com, and that doesn't work. And so if you are looking to acquire a competitor and you want to, not what is the word? I was going to say dilute. It's not dilute. Sort of dissolve and become one. Your profitability needs to be up there. It needs to be high. And then you're also going to have your cash. But it might be that that's not just for a merger and acquisition. It might be that actually you want to build up cash reserves in case COVID happens again, or something like COVID, which touch wood it won't, but we never know. And so I think a lot of businesses now have realized like either their cash fund have really been drained and their reserves were really drained during COVID, and so therefore they need to up them again, or it was that COVID completely blindsided them and that never sort of took them out as a business, and they've managed to stay alive for whatever, through whatever means. But actually, if it happened again, they'd be in a really difficult, sticky situation, and they don't want to be in that. And they want to really feel strong and feel secure and have a really strong foundation. And therefore, if that is the case, building up cash reserves is really key, but that's going to mean upping your profitability and really committing to that as a journey. If this is something that you're looking at, I can help you with that. Don't panic. There's a lot of things I can do, and I work with businesses, my clients, where we try and, when I say try, we do create strategy and we make it happen so that they have this kind of, they're ready for things coming up ahead. The other thing here is if you want investment. So if you want to get investment and you're already an established business, upping your profitability will make it a lot easier. Now, there's argument, obviously, if you're at the startup stages, that you need to focus on your revenue, and that's attracted to investment. But what I'm talking about is if you want investment in your business, if you can show a high profitability, it will get a certain type of investor very quickly, and a certain type of funding, and the your journey you go on and your raise and stuff. It's just a lot easier if you can show up and be like in your pitch deck, like, this is our profitability and this is really decent, and people can see they're plain sighted what the benefit is to them. And people kind of blindside that a bit, and they think, oh, it doesn't really matter. But if you want a certain type of investor, quite an engaged one, arguably, or someone who is connected to what you do, profitability can normally really help that. We're nearly finished, people. I hope you're enjoying this episode. I'm enjoying chatting with you today. Another interesting option is when you should focus on profit over revenue growth is sometimes about attracting and maintaining employees. So if you want to, and this is really key right now, so if you want to attract high level talent, like if you want the best of your best at your organization, or you just generally want to keep people for longer, looking at upping your profitability can really help because it just allows you to pay them more. Now, that's not the only reason, and I'm not going to go into all the reasons, but one of the key reasons is around being able to pay people. And often a business can't do that because they say that the money isn't there. And often I'm the one that has to go in and say, well, is the money not there, or have we not made a priority for it to be there? And how do we make a priority for it to be there? And often that's going to come from you upping your profit margin. Because some people will say, well, I can't do X and I can't do Y. I'm like, okay, well, you don't have to up your profit. That's ultimately where it comes from. That's me simplifying that very, condensing it down and simplifying it. And it's much more of a wider conversation. But if you really want to focus on team and focus on having the best of the best people, arguably looking at your profit over revenue growth can really help for a period of time. I'm not saying that, forever and ever that's the case, but I think that's hopefully what you've learned from this episode, and you're learning is that actually this is something that moves and it changes, and it's like for a year or 5 years it can be one thing, and then another period of time it's going to move into something else, and then it will change. Like, it's not that you have to commit to one thing, it's not that it's only like one option. Finally, the last point of this is, if you are going to sell your business and you are getting ready for that process, you focusing on your profit over revenue growth can really, really help you. If you're going to exit a business, if you can maximize profit, it will really help with obviously your sale and your value. And the valuation of your business, which we're not going to get into today, the profitability is such a massive, huge part of that. And people want to buy businesses that make sense and that are profitable and that have a future ahead of them and are stable and, have growth opportunities, but are also really reliable. And therefore it is totally fine and totally good for you to focus on upping your profitability so that it benefits you when you exit, but it also benefits the people who are going to carry on the business and buy the business from you or acquire the business. And so, yeah, if you're getting your business ready to sell, look at your profitability. Sometimes people really skip that step and they're so focused on the sale that they really miss the point of like, well, what is the person buying and what is the value of that? Sometimes people, once they decide they're going to sell, that isn't necessarily an overnight thing. That's a years and years long thing. Yeah. Some people like to and fro. Are they going to exit? Are they not? I don't know. Blah, blah, blah. Becomes a long drawn out thing. Then there's sometimes a decision made of, yep, I'm going to do it. Then there becomes a decision where they get an evaluation and they're like, I'm not sure. Then they're like, oh, well, how do we get more? And this can go on for years and years and years and years. And so don't miss the step of, well, actually, if you're looking to increase your valuation, is it worth you staying in the business for an extra 2 or 3 years or 6 months even? It doesn't have to be, sometimes it's not even that long to get a business to a certain point from a revenue perspective or from a profit perspective, and get your profit to a point which is really healthy, which then is going to sort of 2 times, 3 times, 4 times up your valuation. I'm not saying it will do that, but I'm saying for some businesses you can do that, and it is very, very, it's worth the time commitment. It's worth you doing that extra thing and looking at that to really benefit both you and the person who's buying the business. Those are my thoughts today around what should you focus on, and should you focus on revenue or should you focus on profit? I hope you've enjoyed it. I know it's been an interesting conversation. There's a lot of to and fro, and there's a lot of ifs and buts and nuance. I hope you lean into that. I hope you enjoy that. I know it's frustrating. I know some of you will roll your eyes as you hear me say that, but it's key for me to say, because this whole process of scaling a business is difficult and it is personal and it is down to what you want. And I think that's hopefully what you've taken from this episode, and what you kind of leave with is an understanding of, actually, I need to decide what I want, and then I can build a business and build a strategy and know which direction to go in once I understand that fully. As I mentioned, if any of this resonates with you, please share on social, tag me and say your thoughts on it, or let me know what you think. I think it's a really interesting episode. And if you have listened to this and you've got a lot of ideas flowing and you're thinking about a lot of things, or you want to talk this through, or you want to dive into this, or you want to do this piece of work and really fully understand where you're at with this, then reach out and I can, we can work together. An intensive is a great option for this. CEO strategy day, if you really want to overhaul the business and get the business ready for a specific direction, or whether you are launching a new revenue stream and maybe you want to increase your profitability through a new revenue stream, which we haven't talked about, but that is ultimately one thing that you can really do that really helps your business. I am here. I look forward to working with you. And I look forward to tuning in with you next week, and we'll be back with another episode. So take care, sending you lots of love, and I will speak to you very soon. Bye.